Blessings in the name of the Lord Jesus. Welcome to Paraclet TV, making disciples through the power of the Holy Spirit. So let us now start with the lecture about how do you treat qualitative data. And as I am emphasizing, the data in a qualitative research design is in the form of texts. We call them as accounts, text or accounts. So the following may produce narrative data according to Taylor Powell, and this require analysis. How are you going to solicit or gather narrative data or accounts? You can do it through one, by having open-ended questions and written comments on questionnaires. And when these are being answered by your respondents, it will generate single word or brief phrases or full paragraphs. So we speak about open-ended questions. The participants, most specifically the respondents, are there to write or to speak about freely about their answers in the stated question, wherein there will be no choices, but you are going just to give the prepared question and they are free to answer your question. We call that as open-ended question. And their answers can be in word or words. They can answer also in phrases or even in paragraphs to justify their answer. Another way of soliciting narrative data is through testimonials. And these testimonials, of course, are can be a reaction to a program, or they can give it in few words, or they can do it lengthily by giving their own comments or their experiences about the incidents or about your topic. They can do it in writing, or they can also do it in just utterances. And one popular way of soliciting narrative data is through interviews or individual interview. Individual interview can produce narrative data that we call notes, and we can also have these notes by using transcripts so that everything will be read and will be reread for you to take notes of the important utterances of your participants. And you can also solicit data in a form of discussion groups or focus group interviews. So individual interviews, you can be the enumerator or the interviewer, and there's only one interviewee wherein you can solicit data. But in the discussion groups, you can have two or more interviewers, or you can also have two or more interviewees at the same time, so that the data will be uttered, and that will serve as answers to your stated questions. Not only about open-ended questions, testimonials, individual interviews, or discussion groups or focus group, but also the available logs, journals, and diaries may also be sources of narrative data. Now, you can get from them if they are available, because they are really very valid, no, very valid evidences of accounts. Then, if you are already an expert, you can conduct observation by using an observation checklist, or if you are already experts in your own field and you specialize in a certain discipline, you can record it by just jotting notes or descriptive accounts as a result of your observation. So when you observe, you are not only using your eyes, the sense of seeing, but of course the other senses can be used for observation, which includes your hearing, your feeling, and other types of senses. And then The other documents, reports, and news articles that are available, or written materials that are reviewed and coming from refutable sources. Say, for example, government agencies or organizations that are officially given permits from authorized or from the authority. You can get and have data coming from their documents. Then stories may provide data from personal accounts of experiences. This is also a kind of testimonials, but not all stories are in a form of testimonies. They can narrate stories, but these are based from what they have read or based from what they have watched. So that can also be in a form of narrative data. So there are many sources that we can find and where we can have or source out the different data to answer our stated concerns or issues in a qualitative research. So there are many of them. And these are some of the questions that you have to ask when you are doing the analysis of data in a qualitative research. So these are the questions to ask. The first questions that you can ask to treat the narrative data is the first question: what patterns or common themes emerge around specific items in the data? So we have important terms here. We have patterns, or it is slash with common themes. So themes and patterns in these questions are synonymous to each other. How do these patterns help shed light on the broader study questions? So you have to locate the patterns or the themes. The second question: are there any deviation from these patterns? If yes, what factors could explain these atypical responses? So the factors that might deviate from the common patterns that you have already coded or that you have already analyzed coming from the different accounts, based from the testimonials or based from the different accounts that your respondents have uttered, you can base the deviation coming from the common themes. What interesting stories emerge from the data? So the interesting stories can be the verification, or it can also be the justification of the themes that you have synthesized coming from the accounts. Interesting stories. How can these stories help shed light on the broader study question? So usually, the interesting stories can be placed in the discussion of the themes or the discussions of the patterns. When you have already formed the patterns or the themes, you have to discuss that. And in your discussion, we call that as the interpretation of data. No, in the interpretation of data, you can include interesting stories or important utterances based from the transcript of accounts that you have done. Another question that you can include: does any of the patterns or emergent themes suggest that additional data needs to be collected? Does any of the study question need to be revised? So there is a need of determining if there is a need of collecting once again or going back to your participants to make it clearer. Because if there are new themes or emerging themes outside the themes that you have already collected or that you have already identified based from the transcript of accounts, then you found out there is an emerging themes and there's no justification of the themes, then all you have to do is to go back to your participants and have another interview, or go back to your collected documents and find out if there are justifications of the emerging patterns. Do the patterns that emerge support the findings of other corresponding qualitative analysis that have been conducted? So the emerging themes can be a confirmation or affirmation of the themes that you have recently identified. No. So these are now the process of analyzing or treating the data of a qualitative research. The first one is you have to get to know the data. How will you get to know the data? Of course, if you have the documents, if you have the taped or recorded interview, you have already your observation notes. All you have to do in getting to know the data is to read them. After reading, you have to reread and reread until finally you thoroughly come to the full understanding, and you have already coded important terms or accounts. The tape and recording should be played and listened to several times. So it is not enough that you listen to it at once. Because during the transcript of what is recorded in your, say for example, in your cell phone or recording gadget, you have to really do the transcript. And it is advised that you as a researcher will be the one to conduct the interview if the interview is to be used as the way of collecting the data, because during the interview, you as the researcher must observe the facial expression, the body gestures or the body movement, because there are words that are being uttered, they are considered important, but similarly, there are unuttered, no, unuttered responses, such as by facial expression or by body movements, the tone of voice must be observed by you as a researcher. So if you are going to get the service of an enumerator or the service of one who will conduct the interview, it will be difficult for you as a researcher to have the accurate interpretation or the coding of the, or getting to know the data deeply. These impressions may be useful later. The quality of the data should be considered before the analysis. Then after you have read or reread, after you have heard or reheard, no, the tape interview, you focus now on the analysis, meaning you focus on the answers. What are the important utterances or terms that the participants or your respondents have accounted to or accounted for? This can be done in two approaches. One, focus by question or topic. No, in a qualitative research, you have your central question and you have also the sub-questions. So you can use the sub-questions to focus on the analysis of the answers. And then you can also use the time or the period or the event. Say, for example, there are utterances or interview that you have conducted during the first 10 minutes. You look at the first 10 minutes, then the second 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. Now, focusing on the analysis can be done through one, by looking at how individuals or group responded to each question on the topic for a given time period or event. How the individuals, meaning you are looking and very sensitive on the facial expression, on the body gestures, on the tone of voice, on the stress, as well as on the emphasis they are given as their answers, or the repeated words that they are uttering can be important accounts. And two, by organizing the data by question to look across all respondents and their answers in order to identify consistencies and differences. Regularly, when you are the interviewer for a qualitative research, to make it systematic, you are using your sub-questions, no, as the guide for you to solicit answers to your qualitative research. Your sub-questions will be your guide to organize the answers of your respondents. Put all the data from each question together so you can categorize, use category, and the categories can be the stated sub-questions, and all the answers will be placed in a matrix. Which answer will be in category 1, which answer will be in category 2, or in category 3. If you have 3 sub-questions, the questions can be done in linear, or you can also do it in series, meaning you are asking the question in different orders. If there are 3 sub-question, you can answer it in different manners. You can throw or cast the questions in different manners. It can be in linear or it can be in series. Apply the same approach to particular topics or time period or an event or interest. And then you can also explore the connections and relationship between questions, because there might be questions that are connected, to each other. So there might be answers coming from question number 1 or category number 1 that can also answer the category number 2. So that is how you are going to focus on your analysis. Now, in doing, after you have focused on the analysis, you can now start coding. No, what is coding? Coding is a process, an important strategy in answering, in treating the data. And this is a process of categorizing the data. You reread, you reread, and then you know the data, and then analyze the data. And for you not to go back once again to the data, you have to do some coding, so that you will remember what data is of category number 1, which data will be for category number 2, which account is related to category 1 or category 2. Similarly, it's a process of reducing the data into smaller groupings so that they are more manageable. So, meaning if there is an utterance in a sentence, you can code it as just a word or a phrase, so that it will be easily synthesized at the end of your analysis. This will help the researcher to begin to see relationships between categories and patterns of interaction. Codes can be developed using predefined codes. The predefined codes are what you know already upon consulting the different literatures in chapter 2, because even in a qualitative research, you must have an input, and the input is coming from the review of literatures. And when you read related literatures to your study, you can find already codes. We call that as predefined codes. Those which you have read before you go on the gathering of data. And once that emerge from the data. So the emerging data or the emerging themes are the things that are new outside the things that you have already read. Okay, and I think that's a very good contribution to the scholarly world when you can identify emerging patterns or emerging themes as an answer to your stated question. There are predefined codes. I've already explained, are codes formulated by the researcher based from his knowledge through the reviewed literature. And emerging codes are codes that become apparent as one reviews the data. Okay. Example of coding. So we have this question: what do you need to continue your learning about evaluation? So this is an example in which the topic is about evaluation, and these are now the utterances or the answers of the participants. So the answers are 1 to 10, more advanced data analysis, more time information on all concepts, just start doing it, and so on and so forth. And the following are the coding. So the coding are TRG, training, it can be time, it can be result, it can be person, feedback. So these are coding depending upon you as a researcher of what code you are going to place in each account. So after you have coding, I think there is another example here. So example of the actual coding can be like this. So this is my own paper when I conduct a qualitative research of the experiences of newly passed CPAs becoming as instructors in the college. So there are questions or probing questions, because you will see that you can go on deeper interview and you can solicit honest and very concrete examples if you know how to probe. So when we say probing, it is a process of questioning the answers that they have given to your question. The art of probing is asking a subsequent questions of your first or preliminary question. So what do you do is an example of probing. And the answer, I am going to make exam ahead of time. Now, kasi 3 days before. How about the student's relationship? So this is one question. I have some confusion, so on and so forth. So the red ones are the codes that I have placed. So sorry that these are very hard to read, but this is just to show to you that the transcript that I have posted here based from the recorded video, you can read this once and read this twice, read this thrice, so that everything will be understood and you will come up to the saturation of the accounts. And by placing the reds are now your codes. Then after the coding, you can continue to clean the data. And the cleaning the data can be done by means of the following. The first one is by doing spot checking. When you do spot checking, you are comparing your codes or the raw data, the one that is spoken by your respondents. And you can also do this with an application from the internet, in treating a qualitative research. So there are available applications like the, you can use Mendeley, in paraphrasing, but there are also other applications that can be used for treating not only the SPSS for quantitative data, but there are also applications for qualitative data. So spot checking can be done electronically, but although it is very laborious when you do this naturally or manually. Now, for qualitative data, one should use this approach to check whether the participants' words were transcribed accurately and are attributed to the right individuals. If no error was found in the first round of the spot checking, the researchers should randomly check another round of the raw data. So you can do the second round by means of random checking to spot the checking, to do the spot checking. It is clear that it is not an isolated incident. The researcher needs to go all over the raw data to ensure that all data were recorded correctly. No, spot checking is just locating one account or two or more so that you will see their differences or similarity. The next way of cleaning the data is by means of eyeballing. What is eyeballing? It involves reviewing the data for errors that may have resulted from a data entry or coding mistake. So right after you have conducted the transcript, in a document after you have heard and reheard the the recorded interview, you have to make it to do eyeballing so that in reviewing the transcript, you can also find if there are wrong no, entry in the transcript. We call that as coding mistake. For example, question 5 from sample code books above reads, did you participate in the summer program? Participants can only respond to this question with a no or yes. No is assigned to a value of 0, while yes responses are assigned a value of 1. 0 and 1 can be used as codes. Therefore, any number other than a 0 or 1 in the question number 5 column on the sample spreadsheet would be an obvious error. That's the one example. If the researcher finds said such errors, he needs to go back to the original raw data survey and enter the participants' answer correctly. So that's one very practical example of eyeballing. Next, logic check. So how do you do the logic check in cleaning the data? The technique involves a careful review of the electronically entered data to make sure that the answers to the different questions make sense. There are times that the answers are just implied. So in that case, you have to use your logic or your common sense to understand what is the real essence of the participants or the respondents' utterances. If the participant 1 on the sample spreadsheet indicated that they did not attend the summer program in question number 5, it would be illogical for this participant to have provided a satisfaction rating in the response to question number 6. Correct. So that is one way of logic check. As with the other types of error, if the researcher will find one, she needs to go back to the original raw data of the participants and enter the correct data instead. The best practice is to use all three approaches so that the researcher is sure that all possible errors were eliminated. What are these three? You have the spot checking, you have the eyeballing, and you have also the logic test. Now, in cleaning the data, always refer back to the research question. Rely on your intuition as an evaluator. Rely on the expertise of other individuals for a thorough understanding of the program. It is good to have another evaluator after you as an main author of a qualitative research. You can ask another one expert before you can go to your advisor for final checking of the answer. Then after the codes and cleaning the data, you can now to identify patterns or themes. Patterns are ideas, concepts, behavior, interactions, terminologies, or phrases that emerge from the codes. Say, for example, you have the question, what makes a quality educational program? So the categories can be the staff, the relevance, the participant, timeliness, and content. So STF, the part, the RL, the time can be your codes in knowing the data. What is the benefit of a youth mentoring program? So benefit to youth, Y, code, to mentors, M, family, FAM, and community, COM. So these are example of the categories that are derived from the codes, meaning based from the codes that you have solicited, you can now categorize its codes, and the categories can be the themes. The last example from the work of Canlas. So Canlas is a kapampangan. So these are the different codes, and the categories are kapamilya qualities or kapampangan qualities. We call this as the pattern or the theme. What are the kapampangan qualities? Matapang, talakad, king, usto, and so on and so forth. Kapampangan practices, the following at your left are example of the codes. Okay.
Share Jesus.
Subscribe and
Subscribe and
share
share
Haraplet
Haraplet TV.
TV.
Go, go, go.